everybody could use their power, then everyone can help everyone. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing?
Sixth through eighth grade is an awkward phase for students. It's a transition from leaving elementary to preparing for high school. I can relate to that. An uncomfortable situation for me was when I was in my sixth grade English class and our teacher had us watch the movie Selma because we were writing a paper on the civil rights movement. The movie focuses on Martin Luther King Jr. and his march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama for the voting rights campaign in 1965. It shows how civil rights activists were attacked by police officers with tear gas, canine dogs, and water hoses. It wasn't watching this movie that made me feel uncomfortable, but it was after the fact that one of my friends came up to me and she told me how sorry she felt for me. In that moment, I couldn't understand why she was apologizing. In my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade years, every time Black History Month would roll around, we would cover figures like Rosa Parks and Ruby Bridges. But I know names beyond that list, and topics that we didn't cover that should be included in Black History Month. I only know this because I've traveled to places like the National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., or the Black Wax Museum. Why was it that I had to go outside of school to get this information? And why weren't my peers being taught the same thing as well? It's not just African American history, but US history. In my junior year, I was able to take AP African American Studies. The course analyzes historical, cultural, and the diverse contributions of African Americans in Africa, while also exploring the African diaspora. Before, I thought history was just about learning names, dates, and wars, and I never really understood why or the full picture behind it. This class helped me empower my identity by learning my cultural heritage. But most importantly, it taught me that history is not just about the past, but it's about how systems of power are built and maintained today. It went beyond anything I've ever learned in a standard history class. It finally clicked to me that it's not about what we learn, it's that what we don't learn is intentional. The way history is taught is not about education, it's about control. Governments and institutions have used education as a tool to shape narratives, erase uncomfortable truths, and maintain systems of power. The suppression of information can be seen in every period of time. It can be blatantly done, like the book burnings done by the Nazi regime, or Christian groups in AD BCE, or American slaveholders against abolitioners. Or it can be discreet, by leaving out key information in a textbook. The common factor here is that these groups do this because they feel like educating the masses with opposing views would be a threat to their way of life. This is why education matters. Having a broad understanding of history gives us the tools to challenge injustices, not only for ourselves, but for everyone else. In school, we are conditioned and taught not to think about indigenous people. Why is it that we barely cover their culture, yet we're living on their land? How about their continuous forced removal? Have they been pushed onto reservations and pushed into poverty? Why don't we learn that their children were forced into government-run assimilation camps, but yet we can use them as sports team mascots? The same thing happens with Latinx people. Yet Spanish is the second most spoken language in America. Behind me is David Farragut. Why don't we learn that he was the first US Navy admiral and a son of a Spanish immigrant? Why don't we learn Mendez versus Westminster in 1947 that desegregated public schools in California for Mexican Americans? This paved the way for Brown versus the Board of Education, which desegregated public schools nationally. This lack of information on their culture persuades American audiences to view them as outsiders, yet they've always been present and helped turn this country into what we know it is today. We've been conditioned and taught to think certain ways about topics we do learn. We credit Lincoln for freeing the slaves, yet this downplays any Black involvement in the impact we had in achieving our own freedom. But we don't focus on Black rebellions or revolutions. Behind me is the Louisiana Slave Revolt in 1811, which was the largest slave rebellion on US soil. We learn about civil rights, but schools put a heavy emphasis on focusing on nonviolence. We leave out radical groups like the Black Panthers, who created the first breakfast program for children. This started as a small initiative in Oakland to feed kids before school, to give them the energy they needed to get an education. Then it grew to feeding tens of thousands of children across America. After the Panthers were dismantled, pressure was put on the government because of its popularity. They continued this program in things like the school breakfast program, which feeds millions of children today. We learn about MLK, but what they don't teach you is that towards the end of his life, towards his assassination, he was starting to campaign with the Poor People's Movement in Washington, D.C. in 1968 to end poverty. This is important because it's not a racial issue. Poverty affects everyone. And if people are united in fighting for economic equality, that could disrupt systems of established wealth and power. A collective understanding of this would be too loud. That's why we are kept divided by things like race, socioeconomic status, and class. It keeps it easier to control people. This is why it is intentionally left out of our education. Our curriculum reflects not only how we see ourselves, but others. Some of the things I've just talked about you might have been unaware of, but that just highlights the gaps in our education. What we learn is the foundation of our perceptions and judgments. When everyone can fully understand and recognize history, systemic oppression, and the forces that shape society, that is how we begin to dismantle them, and then we have a demand for change in mass movements. Some of the misconceptions we learn in history is that Africa was uncivilized, destitute, or undocumented prior to European colonialism. This is not true. In fact, this narrative is pushed by the US education system as a way to justify slavery and colonization. Africa has always been rich in natural resources like oil, diamonds, and gold. This is why Europeans traveled there to trade with Africans. If we can learn about African kingdoms, this can help challenge some of the misconceptions that we have. Behind me is a coin from the Aksum Empire. The empire originated in 100 BCE and was established in northern Ethiopia today. They established a form of currency and trade routes with the Roman Empire and India through the Mediterranean Sea. What is most important about this empire is that they converted to Christianity before colonialism, meaning they accepted it on their own terms. It's important to note that Africa and Africans were not just slaves in the 16th century. Behind me is Juan Garrido. He was a free Black conquistador and traveled with Spanish military expeditions to the Americas, meaning he was there before the transatlantic slave trade. Later, when he retired, he stayed on a farm and planted the first grain of wheat in New Spain. All this information is important because it is essential to help us undo historical ignorance in understanding the depth of Africa and its people. Knowledge is power. Understanding these systems is how we begin to dismantle them. What we're facing right now with DEI removals is not just a minority issue. They impact everyone, but it only seems to matter when it hits close to home. Recently, NBC News reported that a volunteer veterans group that helps vets connect with other vets, gives them a space to talk about their mental health, and do community service has been put on indefinite pause, meaning they've been forced to stop any activities, meetings, and plans. Also, programs like Medicaid and food stamps are synonymous with only benefiting people of color. But in actuality, huge recipients are rural and working class Americans. The urgency to act is now more than ever. Everything we've learned is intentional, from the way history is taught and the perspectives and the lack thereof. Education is empowering. When we become informed, we become advocates. In this society where information is so easily manipulated, seeking education is the only way to recognize the truth. The pursuit of education is not just for personal growth, but for the benefit of society. The more people that are educated, the stronger the movement for justice becomes. Education gives us the power to uplift, unite, and fight systems of oppression. Without it, change would be nearly impossible. But with it, we have the power to reshape the future. Thank you.